Hello everybody, Raven Knight here. Well guys, another year of For Honor and 4 brand new hero skins to add, plus some licensed ones, and it's time to once again decide which hero skins are the best and which ones are the worst. This year we had some really cool ones, including the Unsung Knight in Season 1, Master Katashi in Season 2, Goodmunder the Great in Season 3, and now General Zhe in Season 4. Now some of you noticed that I didn't include Ezio, the Crucible Lord or the Violet King, and there's a reason. They're licensed hero skins. Unoriginal. They are ripped from an existing source, and for that reason, I'll only be focusing on the original designs for this video. With that said, today we're going to discuss all these hero skins and decide which one is best and which one is worst. However, like last year, this video isn't going to be so cut and dry as just which one looks better. We're going to also talk about the lore of these characters as well. So first, we'll talk about which hero looks the best this year, and then we'll talk about which hero is the best in terms of lore. Now bear in mind, a hero that looks great may not have the best lore, so that will make this even more interesting. Then, to make this even more fun, we're going to compare the best hero skin of this year to the best of last year, and the worst of this year to the worst of last year, and decide of, I believe it's the 12 hero skins that we have, which one is the best and which one is the worst. So, let's get started. To start off with, let's talk about looks. In terms of looks, this was really hard for me to determine, as all the designs do look really good. However, I did have to narrow this down, and unfortunately, I dismissed the Unsung Knight and Goodmunder from the top of the list for one reason. They already existed. The Unsung Knight is the warden seen in the opening trailer of the game, and Goodmunder is one of the bosses you fight in the Knight storyline of the campaign, so it's kind of cheating to count them as the best when they were kind of already set up for them, right? That leaves Katashi and Zhe, and again, this is really hard to call. On the one hand, I'm not a huge fan of the design of Zhe's sword, but on the other hand, I love the floating kind of tassel or banner behind Zhe's head, which looks so ornate and gorgeous. It's an absolutely stellar skin, all things considered. Really, it all comes down to the preference and what matters most to you in terms of what you find most appealing. And if you really force me to decide, I mean really twisted my arm on this, I think I will have to give a very slight edge to General Zhe. To me, while the sword is a little odd looking, I love the detail of the moving starlight on the blade, as well as the fact that even the eyes of the snake on his helm can change their color based on your color palette. I think the only reason I don't give Katashi the top spot is because of the Sogonari Kabuto. Sogonari Kabuto, or Kabuto with hair on the helmet, which is what we see on Katashi, which, I mean, it looks awesome. It looks like a lion's mane. It's just not my preference, and it makes this wandering swordsman kind of aesthetic look a little too ornate. I know that sounds weird, but the whole aspect of his lore was that he was a wandering swordsman, and so when I see this, I'm like, he doesn't look like a wandering swordsman, he looks like a daimyo. Don't misunderstand me. I love Katashi and Zhe, and it's really hard to pick which one is better. I really had to weigh this, but if I really had to choose, I'm going to go with Zhe in first place, with Katashi definitely in second, but it is a very close lead, and largely based on my own preference. Third place is tricky, but I think I will lean on the Unsung Knight for third place, or Unsung Ruth as many fans call her. For one thing, while her design looks very simplistic, I often tend to appreciate the more simple but effective designs. Her sword does seem a little out of place for her more basic design because the sword looks so much more ornate, but at least the sword looks cool, and experimenting with materials on this hero skin can be very fun. The long braid behind her works better on this helm too, because we can see that she's not wearing a chainmail hood. Me and my brother had a lot of issues with the female warden design because of the braid coming out of the helmet, when we can see that the warrior's wearing a chainmail hood and you shouldn't be able to see a braid. But in this case, it makes a lot more sense because we don't see that braid. Well, we see the braid, but we don't see the chainmail hood. Plus, to give full credit to where it's due, the Unsung Knight was taken from a cinematic trailer, meaning they didn't have a model already to draw from, they had to get creative, so that is very impressive. Goodmunder, meanwhile, is fine. He definitely looks good, and it's nice to finally see him in For Honor, but I'd be lying if I said he was my favorite. His shield, for one thing, looks really silly, which is funny since he had a very nice looking shield in the campaign. It just looks over the top to me and in no way subtle, which would have worked a lot better. Then there's the fact that the material and color changes don't make a whole lot of difference on him like they do with Unsung Knight, Katashi, or Zhe. It's definitely more noticeable. It's definitely there. Okay, don't get me wrong. You can see it, but it's not as noticeable. Not as big a deal, if you get my meaning. Like, put it in perspective. When you change up the color palette of Zhe, or Katashi, or the Unsung Knight, it's very clear, very evident. With Gudmundur, I don't know, it doesn't feel quite as there. I mean, it's there, don't get me wrong, it's kind of weird to describe. It doesn't seem as big a deal, if you know what I mean. Like, the color scheme doesn't look as big a deal in terms of his look. So in the end, I think Gudmundur is probably the weakest of the skins in terms of look for this year. Not that I don't like it, but that is my stance. And you know, I will say this again, it was a hard choice. A lot of the hero skins do look good. Like, even Gudmundur looks really good to me. I like the design. But if you really twisted my arm, this would be the ranking that I gave them. But now, let's talk about the lore of them, and this time we'll start with the worst instead of the best. This year, I think the worst lore, sadly, goes to Gudmundur again. I hate to beat up on this guy, but of the lore we got, he really isn't all that impressive. Just like Ramiel in the first hero skin, it's a legend more than it is anything. A fireside tale told about the exploits of Gudmundur. However, unlike Ramiel, where it's speculated whether or not he's even a real person, Gudmundur was real in the world of For Honor, so we know this legend of his probably isn't true because of how fantastic it is. Gudmundur finds himself in a hellscape with a bunch of wolf pups and dedicates himself to protecting them after discovering the shield and sword of Odin. I mean, that's cool, but it seems so convenient. It does explain why Gudmundur has wolves for pets when you fight him, but I'd like to know more about the real Gudmundur. Plus, if this guy is so badass he fought Hellspawn, how'd this guy lose to some random dude no-name warden? Frankly, I think I would have liked to have known who he was for real. How did he become a Jarl? Why was he so set to defend a storehouse rather than a military encampment? Does he have a family? What was Valkenheim to him? I guess what I mean to say is that while the lore is fine, it's not bad by any means, what kills it for me is knowing it's just a tall tale about a guy who we know to be a real figure in this world. It's like the George Washington and the Cherry Tree story. When you find out that the story isn't real and never actually happened, it suddenly makes you wonder, okay, so what is real about Washington? I'd like to know the real history of this guy, but that's the thing, we don't know the real history of Gudmundur. Only that you fight and kill him in the campaign, and I would have liked to know who the real Gudmundur was before you killed him. Instead, we got a tall tale. Again, a well-written tall tale, a nice tall tale, but a tall tale. It's a legend, and compared to what other stuff we get, it's just not as good. Now, second worst lore goes to Katashi. This was a hard one for me to decide, actually. But hear me out. Hear me out why I think Katashi is in third place. I like the lore. I'm a sucker for those badass samurai or western scenes where the wandering hero travels into town, beats the bad guy, then tips his hat to the little kid or the beautiful damsel and goes, "See you around, kid," and walks off into the sunset, very Clint Eastwood style. I love those stories. They kick ass and they fill the little romantic in me with giddiness. The problem here is the sword itself. In the lore, the Muramasa blade grants the one who wields it incredible power, but at the cost of their self-control and sanity. Katashi beats the guy who held it, takes the blade, and then has to use his own mastery of Zen to keep his self-control while still taking the benefits of the blade. So that begs a series of questions. First, how? Wouldn't it be fascinating if we could explore the process and steps Katashi takes to overcome the blade? Have him touch the sword and suddenly jolt back, feeling the evil within it. You know, you could treat the sword kind of like the One Ring from Lord of the Rings, where he's tempted to take it but knows what it could mean. For a blade so evil, shouldn't he at least hesitate before choosing to use it? Secondly, second question, when Katashi duels Oniwaka, the Sohei, it says they fought to a standstill, like a tie. So I gotta wonder, was it Katashi himself who was Oniwaka's equal, or was it the sword? Keep in mind, the sword gives great power to its user, so without it, would Oniwaka have won? Is it truly the weapon that was most powerful, or was it the wielder? We don't really know, and that's a bit of a problem. And finally, who was Katashi? Before he gets the sword, he was just a wanderer, right? So who was he before he was a wanderer? We get a little hint in his lore that he doesn't talk about his past, but did he serve another master? Why did he become a wanderer? I'd like to know at least some of that. Leaving his origins a mystery isn't too bad if you at least give a clear direction for his character to go, but unfortunately, we don't know what he's doing now. Is he still guarding the Maya Bridge to this day? Or after dueling Oniwaka, is he doing something else? Is he training new Sohei with Oniwaka? How? Why? You see, Katashi starts to ask more questions than answer anything. Again, I love the lore, it's really cool, but there are questions that I ask that really bring it down for me. So now, in second place, I think I'll go with the Unsung Knight. Like Gudmundur, her story is also a legend, but like Ramiel, there are speculations about her existence. In fact, I'd go so far as to call her story a parable or a fable. I initially complained about the Unsung Knight not having a name, but as was pointed out to me, the name isn't relevant, only the deeds, and that is a good point. It doesn't matter who you are, any knight should have the honor, temperament, and conviction to do what's right in the face of tragedy and despair. She appears in a time of great need, makes a stand that unites all of Ashfeld, and then disappears, leaving not even her name to remember, because it's not about the name, but about the deed, just like the sword she carries, and that's inspiring. I think my only problem with her is that I'd like to have heard how she interacted with the first Viking and samurai. How did that battle go down? I mean, we can assume she came out on top, but how did they feel seeing this lone warden appear like she did? What was all that about? I think what it comes down to with the Unsung Knight for me is she's a lot, like I said, she's a lot like Ramiel, but the difference is between her and Gudmundur is Gudmundur was clearly a real person in the lore. This character, the Unsung Knight, might not have even existed, but maybe it should just be a tale that knights tell to talk about the beginning of the Cataclysm and why Ashfeld needs to unite, which I think is very much stronger. So that does leave the winner, again, as General Zhe, and frankly, I could see this coming. Zhe's lore is fascinating. The first villain hero skin lore I really liked. Ravier was just too cartoonishly evil. Vela was only good because of her ability to have introspection and reverence for her foe, and Maddox, I still say he was a missed opportunity, but Zhe is fascinating. A character with a fascinating coldness to him. He's deceptive, cunning, ambitious, underhanded. Yes, Ravier was deceitful too, but her personality was dipped more in so being evil and sadistic than actually striving for something beyond herself. Zhe wants to restore the greatness of the Wu Lin. He wants to remind the world of their power, their strength, and their ferocity. He's sick of being overlooked and forgotten. He wants the Wu Lin to be reborn, and he's the one to do it. In a sense, he sees the Wu Lin's status as a reflection of his own status. It's not enough that the Wu Lin regain their honor and glory. He needs to be at the head of it, the one responsible for it, and his ambition and cunning are so great, he's now targeted the alpha wolf herself, Astria, and even Astria gets the chills with this guy. Bear that in mind, guys. With every other villain that's worked with Astria, she's seen them as mostly tools. Vela was useful to get the gold of the Ocelot, but she didn't shed a tear at Vela's defeat. Ravier got her the Celestial Fear, but she was, again, just a useful soldier. Maddox was a convenient pawn in her conquest of Valkenheim. All powerful, sure, but all just tools in her overall plan. Zhe is a threat. Zhe is a potential serpent in her midst. She is aware he's not to be trusted, and yet she also can't ignore his proposition. He's got too much power and potential for her to just ignore him, and that is a great setup for a villain amongst villains. A figure who wants something good and by all accounts righteous, but all lacquered in a selfish vendetta. This guy's a fantastic villain character, so yes, Zhe takes the cake this year in terms of lore. I just think it's so unique. We finally have something very fascinating, a villain among villains. Like, he's a villain, sure, but he's not just siding with Horkos. I mean, it looks like he is. He's offering an alliance. But we know there's more to it. We know that there's something going on behind the surface, and that's good. That's good writing. That's introspection. That's nuance. That's change. That's complexity. That's what I want in good lore. It's not, I mean, look, don't get me wrong, guys. I'm all about the good versus evil trope. I'm for that. It's my thing. I'm very much on the Tolkien side of writing, not the George R.R. Martin side of writing. I believe in good and evil in writing. I really do. But I do like when there are villains conflicting with other villains, or good guys conflicting with other good guys. Sometimes when you have these different ideologies and different goals and motivations meshing, you can create really complex and fun lore. I'm tired of it just being Horkos de facto bad guy, Chimera de facto good guy. We actually have a villain in Horkos' midst that they're kind of going, we gotta be careful how we deal with this one, which is nice. I love it. Now, before we compare the winners and losers of this year with those of the last 2 years, let's go ahead and discuss the honorable mentions, the 3 licensed skins. I won't discuss the lore because of one thing. I know nothing about Destiny, and for another, it's not fair to compare the lore of licensed characters. People are going to prefer what they want to prefer, and it's best left that way in this case. As for which one looks better, well, that's hard to say. I personally think I like the Crucible Lord in terms of appearance the most, but at the same time, I gotta give props to Ezio. They had to use a male model for Peacekeeper, who's a gender-locked female character, give new voice lines, and change the running animation on her, all to sell this as a male character. That can't have been easy, and that deserves some recognition. I'll just say that all 3 look really cool, and I say the Crucible Lord looks the best, but Ezio is the one that probably had the most work put into it. And to everyone saying that the Crucible Lord and Violet King look way too sci-fi for it, yeah, I can understand that argumentation, and you have my sympathies in that regard, because I do see your argumentation, but just looking at it from how cool they look, I still say that they look really awesome, and that has to count for something. Am I right? I'm right. Okay, so moving on from that, let's get on with determining who is the best overall. Who is the best hero skin and who is the worst? So let's start with who's the worst from both years For Honor. Last year, we established that Bullthorn was probably the worst in terms of design. The worst designed hero skin. He's just a raider that they painted black. Not that interesting. Yes, there are a few minute details like the flowing patterns on his skin and the neat axe design and his dead zombie-like eyes. But otherwise, there's not enough to really talk about with him. So how does it compare to Gudmundur? Let's be honest, Gudmundur is so much better than Bullthorn. Bullthorn maintains his spot on the bottom tier. It's tragic, but it's what it is. While Gudmundur might be taken from an existing character, at least it wasn't taking a raider and painting him black. The more I see what was done with the hero skins this year, the more I shake my head at Bullthorn and ask, what went wrong with this design? I'd probably even give Gudmundur... You know what? I'll say this. I'll put Gudmundur probably above Ramiel. Ramiel's design just always looked awkward to me, like his armor is his skin, not something over his skin, and I just can't get over that oddness. It's just weird. However, I will say that I think Vela is superior to the Unsung Knight, which puts Gudmundur and Unsung Knight pretty firmly in 9th and 10th place. Sad but true, but I do put them in those situations. But how about in the terms of the best? How does General Zhe compared to Sun Wukong? Wukong still wins that pretty definitively. The amount of effort and care put into Wukong just outshines anything I've seen so far. Zhe is fantastic. I'd say that both Zhe and Katashi outshine Maddox and Maiko, who I said were both set for 2nd and 3rd place last year, but Wukong is just too epic for all the reasons I talked about before. The design is so outstanding. The developers essentially took a human and gave him a monkey-like quality, which adds a uniqueness and very original appearance that feels fresh and creative. So here we can see how I'd rank those hero skins, and this list is pretty much filling the page. Next year I may need to find a new method of doing this, because if you notice, this list is kind of filling it up, but here you can see how it's all ranked. You can see how I set it all up. I hope that you guys can see how I did it, and if you have any questions about that, feel free to hit me up in the comments and I will gladly explain why I put the characters where I did. But now, how about the lore? What's the lore? Who had the best lore and the worst lore of all 3 years? I said the worst lore of last year went to Wukong, and the worst lore of this year went to Gudmundur. So who has it worst? I'm going to go with Wukong again. Yeah, I know, isn't it crazy that the monkey gets both the top spot of design and the worst spot in lore both times? Just like I said last year, it's mostly because they had a blueprint to go off of and actually didn't take it. That's like being handed the recipe to cure cancer and deciding, nah, I can do that on my own. Wukong's behavior and attitude shifted, and frankly, it just reeked of inconsistent writing in an obvious attempt to take what we already liked and already recognized and make it something totally different, like standing up to oppression or something like that. I don't even know. Gudmundur's biggest issue was that it felt out of place and disappointing given what we wanted to hear about Gudmundur. I wasn't all that interested in a legendary adventure about the guy I defeated, but rather the man who truly was and what he truly took part in. But even a made-up legend is better than a butchered story. But what about the best lore? Last year I said it was Maiko who had the best lore, and this year I argued Zhe does. So who wins that? Guys, I'm going to be real. This was very hard to decide who won, Maiko or General Zhe, because both have very exceptional lore, and it's really hard to decide. But I did have to choose. And since I had to choose, I will say, I think Maiko wins again. Now, hear me out. I know some people are going to lose their shit, but hear me out. The problem that G has when compared to Maiko is the completion of Maiko's story. Maiko's lore has something that a lot of these other stories just don't have. What I adore about Maiko is that I feel like a true 3-act structured story was told in her place. A clear beginning, middle, and end to the tale of Maiko. Her lore is one that has a definitive structure and direction and conclusion, making it feel complete. Zhe's story is still being written. Now, on the one hand, you could argue that makes Zhe's better because it means it could potentially have more to it later and we could have a similar closure to Zhe's story. But on the other hand, the openness of it makes you crave more, while with Maiko, you don't need more. You've got the full force of the story. It's kind of like looking at Lord of the Rings. You get the 3 movies, you don't need anything after that. I mean, sure, you could get more, that's nice, but we got the 3-act structure. We got the full bit. We've wrapped it up. We're good. We got a pretty pink bow on it, and we're good to go. Zhe's, I want more to it. I want to hear what happens next. I want to know more, which is good in many respects, but Maiko just felt complete to me. Plus, and again, this is just me speaking here, my personal preference, I love the story of a hero who offers up themselves as a sacrifice for the sake of others. I'm a romantic at heart. I'm a big lover of the sacrificial hero. When asking me to choose between the story of a selfless hero who gave everything for the world and a selfish villain who would readily backstab his closest neighbor to give himself an edge, I'll always lean more with the hero. But if you disagree with that, I totally understand the perspective. For me though, since both were just so good, I had to kind of dip into my personal perspective to decide who won. If you disagree, that's totally fine. I respect that, but that is why I chose Micah over him. So for the lore aspect, here is the order I would go in. Wukong at the bottom, just awful, and then working all the way up to Micah. And again, if you have any questions about the order that I went in and why I put them where I did, feel free to ask me respectfully in the comments. And I want to stress before I close out this video that this was not an easy video to make. It never ends. I love all the hero skins this year. I don't think any really disappointed me to the point that I was unhappy. Even Goodmunder, despite the story just being like meh to me, like in terms of just a legend, it was still a decently written legend, and his design is still good. We've wanted a Goodmunder style outfit for a long time for the Warlord, so I'm glad to finally see them here. Not a big fan of the shield, but other than that, it looks really good. It's a very nice skin. Overall, all the skins this year were really, really good. I think that they really knocked it out of the park, and even the licensed ones, while I couldn't count them in this video, I thought they were very good too. I look forward to what they do next year with the hero skins, because I really do hope for more hero skins to come to the game. But that does conclude this video. I have now ranked the best and worst hero skins of this year and overall. Hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.